So growing up, we had a fair share of roommates, and we weren't struggling to keep the lights on or struggling to put clothes on our backboard, but we definitely had times where there was struggle. It was partly because we lived in a state with incredibly high cost of living, and everything is just expensive there, but also because those in charge of finances in the household weren't very conscious of what they were doing most of the time. But we lived in a three-bedroom, and so when we didn't have roommates living alongside us, it was honestly pretty nice. Me and my brother had our own rooms, and my parents, had their own room as well. But that wasn't something that really happened very often, at least until my late teens. If I remember correctly, we actually had four different sets of roommates throughout our time, and the one we're going to be talking about today is a young couple, and we'll call them Darnell and Sarah. And they also had a 2-year-old son named Marshall. If you got your thinking cap on today, you might have done a little bit of quick math in your head and came to the conclusion that, oh, well, that couple with their kid would probably have a room. You and your brother would probably have a room, and obviously your parents would have a room because there is 3 bedrooms after all. However, the kid, the 2-year-old, got a room all to himself. Where does that leave me and my brother, you may ask? Well, the literal fucking cook chair of the house. It was just in some random open corner with no privacy, right by our back door. And our bunk beds were sit back there, and honestly, it was a bunch of bullshit. I don't like shitting on my parents because they did the best they could. However, that shit to this day I still find to be absolutely unacceptable. However, this isn't about my sad living quarters. This is about the couple and their child and all of the escapades that came with it. So Marshall was an absolute menace to society, and that's not his fault. I will never blame a 2-year-old for how they act. I will blame the parents because it's their job to raise them right, and basically because in almost every situation they threw the ball when they should have ran it. Basically, they would let Marshall run rampant until something happened. Instead of taking preventative action, they'd see him doing something crazy, but just let him figure out what happens. And to an extent, I can say that was a good thing. However, more times than less, it was just an excuse to not pay attention to their kid. So Sarah was cooking up some absolute bullshit, and she stepped away from the countertop to go smoke on some of the reefer. And instead of being a responsible parent of a young child and putting the knife she was using back in the sleeve or far enough into the counter where it was out of reach, she left it on the edge of the counter. And given how tall our countertops were at the time, if she didn't put that shit on the literal edge of it, there is no way Marshall could have grabbed it. So when Marshall, the 2-year-old, sees a knife on the edge of the counter, you know that shit is calling to him like a siren. Now, what exactly was Marshall gonna do? To this day, what he wanted with the knife is anybody's guess, but what we do know is when he accidentally reached for Menroon's razor, he didn't get a real good grasp on it, and it fell right off of the counter directly towards their dog. Luckily for everybody involved, the blade of the knife only kind of slapped her back when it fell, and it just like there was a real shallow cut. Nothing that really fucked her up. And even though Marshall was the spawn of something fucking unholy, I know this boy would not stab his dog because it was clear how much he loved her and how this is like the only time he ever snitched on himself because typically getting that kid to fess up to anything took CIA levels of interrogation. So the fact that he immediately told his parents that the knife cut the dog a little bit is pretty telling to me at least how he felt about it. And honestly, again, this is one of those situations where you can't really blame the kid. However, you can blame the negligence of the parents. Now, whatever she was cooking up was not worth the hassle of making the dog feel like an average London citizen because she was a shit cook. And if memory serves correctly, it only got slightly better by the end, but she was competing with herself, so that competition wasn't really that stiff. Now, she typically didn't cook a whole lot for the household on account that even Darnell agreed that my mom made food better, but there were times where my mom worked late, where she was down with the sickness, she, down with it. And so the next officer in line in the cooking brigade was her. One night she whipped up some lemon pepper chicken, and this was the first time I've ever had it too. So I was immediately turned off by the idea by the name alone, because typically I don't really get into those tart, tangy flavors. But holy shit, was it even worse than my little mind could process. This is the only time in my life I have ever use the feed the dog underneath the table strat. And I've had lemon pepper chicken since, and I actually like it. This was just awful. Kid you not, it tastes like a group of lemons ran a train on my chicken tender. They also tended to do this thing where they would only cook for themselves, which, no skin off my back, I wasn't missing out on much, but my mom would never cook without making them food. So it was a little bit disrespectful, but one night at like 11, I was up to take a piss. And I did my business, and when I was on the way out, I smelt some hamburger cooking. And so as I'm leaving the bathroom, I see Sarah flattening out some burgers and patties, and she was whipping up these Big Macs. Darnell walked into the kitchen, and like the nosy child I was, I decided to eavesdrop a little bit. And Darnell, who is completely oblivious to the fact that there is a child in a nearby room listening in, says, "I'm gonna fuck you so good for making me these burgers." And then I remember she says, "Oh, you'd fuck me anyways." And to which this absolute Giga Chad replies, "No, no, I wouldn't." Like in any household, there were days where people don't want to cook, and so we would order in. One time, I believe there was actually a UFC fight going on, and it might have actually been the night McGregor, that coked up leprechaun, reached champ status, but I'm not entirely sure, but I do remember seeing that fight live. However, on this particular night, we got 3 extra large pizzas from Papa Murphy's. And if you don't know about Papa Murphy's, basically you buy the pizza there and you cook it in the oven yourself. I remember they all finished cooking and everybody in the household was staring at them because they looked so damn good. But obviously, you don't eat a pizza when it's fresh out of the 425-degree oven, so we had to give it some time to cool down. And in the less than a minute that nobody was in our kitchen, their dog turned into 1988 Michael Jordan, hopped on the fucking counter. And this counter, like I said earlier, was really tall, but like most boxers, she had some fucking hops. And when we got back into the kitchen, we found her dismembering one of our freshly baked pizzas. And luckily, she only got one of them, and at least didn't look like she had started licking the other ones. So we just took the one she had basically disemboweled and let her finish the job, because nobody was going to eat that unless you wanted a mouthful of dog slobber. Something to know about Sarah is that she came from a really big family. And why that doesn't seem important at first, one of her siblings ended up moving into Marshall's room. And he was like freshly 17, I think, and he got kicked out of his house. So him being related to Sarah and my stepdad having a bit of a savior complex landed us at our crib. Ricardo, we'll call him, was an incredibly interesting character. He was about what you would expect from a late teen in the 2010s. He was always on Omegle, and he was always smacking that douche flute. Around wasn't too bad at that age because it was kind of like having an older brother to an extent. I would definitely not call him that now, or maybe even at that point, but it was adjacent to that. One time he was taking us to the park, and the park was actually just our school playgrounds, and I'm not really sure if we were legally allowed to go there after school hours and play on it, because we did have to jump a fence and there was no easy access to it. However, we did run into faculty a few times and they never told us to beat it, under the assumption that it was fine. However, what Ricardo did was not fine. And given the fact we lived in such a rainy state, there was a large undercover area on our playground where you would shoot some hoops or play some wall ball. But while at the playground one day on our summer break, Ricardo thought it would be a good time to get in touch with his inner hunter-gatherer and leave some art on the walls. He found himself a real nice sharp rock and deeply carved a Buddhist peace symbol on the walls. And I'm not going to show a picture of the Buddhist peace symbol, but what I will say is some Germans in the first half of the 1900s really became fond of this peace symbol and flaunted it like it was their own. And this symbol was in plain view. And when I tell you he carved it there, he fucking carved it. I don't think I ever seen him put so much elbow grease into anything else, as a matter of fact. I thought by the time school rolled around, though, they would have painted over it or something, or at least tried to get rid of it. But like a month and a half later, when school starts up, it was still there in sight for everybody, and it was the talk of the town. But obviously, I wasn't going to be like, hey, yeah, that was me. That was my roommate, actually. One of the few things I do remember about Ricardo is one time, like any man at that age, he wanted to get himself some ink. And, I was interested in that sort of thing. And I told him, oh, what kind of tattoo would you want, Ricardo? And he told me, oh, I want some praying hands on my neck. And so I was like, oh, so you're a Christian. And what he tells me confuses me a little bit because he tells me he's an atheist and he thought it just went hard. But even my young self was confused and I was like, so you're an atheist, but you want praying hands on your neck. And then he says, oh, well, I believe in Greek mythology and stuff, but the worst part was he was being 100% serious. And I've always been a subscriber to the idea it's harder to argue with a stupid person than it is a smart person. So I just walked away. Yeah, that's my most vivid memories of that set of roommates. I might make a video about the other sets. They're not as interesting, I think, but I'm sure I could make it interesting. Anyways, if you've gotten this far in the video, I appreciate it. And if you haven't hit that big hot red subscribe button, you're going to do that right now. And yeah, thanks for watching.